Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Remember to subscribe to our free podcast so you won't miss any of our inspiring content. Here is episode 135.
One of my favorite quotes is that self-confidence is the memory of success.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Olly Richards. Olly Richards is from the UK. He teaches people to learn foreign languages quickly. He learned his first foreign language, which is French, at the age of 19 and went on to learn the others through a combination of travel and self-study. Now with his online businesses, he has produced training courses, live events, books, podcasts, blog posts, and more, which helps people achieve their dream of learning another language. Welcome, Olly.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
After checking out his website, I really am excited to hear your message of how you learned through kind of a self-directed study. But before we get into any of that, tell our audience a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, where to start? My name's Olly and I'm from the UK. My story is one of languages. I've learned a lot of languages over the last 10, 15 years or so. But, I'm someone who didn't grow up that way. And, a lot of people, I think when they look at people who've achieved something or who have developed a certain speciality, they kind of think, well, it's all right for them because they grew up like that or they were surrounded by that stuff in childhood. For me, it's totally different. I mean, I was at college studying music and I didn't do anything with languages at school. I had a few lessons, but the whole school teaching method didn't really work for me. And kind of by a organic process of events, I was living in London, going to college, studying music, and I gradually began to become interested in languages. I think it's because the college that I was at, there were lots of people from loads of different countries, and I kind of realized one day, these guys are coming from all over the world, and they're here, and they're speaking my language, and, how cool is that? But I couldn't say a word to any of them in their language. And I just thought there was something wrong there. And that kind of sparked the interest for me in starting to learn other languages. And as you said, I decided to learn a bit of French. And I actually went to spend some time in Paris there when I was 19. And after that, the last kind of, I'm 34 now, so the last 15 years for me have been a mix of learning languages and traveling to different countries and doing lots of different things. And that's what's become really the kind of driving force of my life.
That's awesome. And well, tell us the story of your journey that led you to discover what you love to do. I mean, you have a website now, a podcast. He's got scores of videos that are just amazing. Give us that story of how that all evolved.
Very organically, very kind of slowly and gradually. And I think it's important to say that because, I speak 8 languages. And usually when I say that, people are like, how is that possible? And how did you do it? But the thing is that I didn't just learn those overnight. It's taken me, the last 15 years to do it. And really, I think the thing is that when I think back to when I was 19 and I started learning French for the first time, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I had no idea. I remember sitting in my bedroom with these. All I knew what to do was what they taught us to do at school, right? Which is a list of 10 words on a piece of paper, go away and try and memorize them. So that's kind of what I did. And it didn't work, obviously, because that's a not very good way of learning languages. And so through a kind of series of events, I ended up with a few months free. And so I did the kind of thing that you can only do when you're 19, which is I bought a one-way train ticket to Paris. From the UK, we can take we've got this train that goes directly to Paris under the English Channel called the Eurostar, which is super cool. And I got on a one-way train to Paris, and I stayed there for a few months. And when I was there, I kind of made it my mission to learn French. And I did the whole studying thing, which most of us will be familiar with from our school days and maybe any attempts we've made to learn languages as an adult. I did that stuff. But I also because I'm a kind of a stubborn person, I also tried out as many different things as I could. So I looked for people to practice with. I got a job in Paris. I did all these different things. And I think by virtue of trying out so much stuff and trying to really find my way, the way that was going to work for me to learn French, I started this long journey of discovering, well, what really, not in theory, but what really causes you to learn a language. And I was successful at learning French. I used to speak extremely well. I haven't practiced much recently, so it's a bit rusty. But after that experience, one of my favorite quotes is that self-confidence is the memory of success. And that was extremely true for me for the ever since, because from the memory of successfully learning French, I was confident that I could go on to learn other languages. And so I did. I went on and learned Italian and Spanish and Portuguese. And then eventually I moved to Asia and I learned Japanese and then Cantonese and more recently Arabic. And I knew that I could do it because I'd had that success in the past. And of course I had a lot of ups and downs on the way, like sometimes some downs that lasted for years. But through those difficult times, you gain wisdom and knowledge. And so through all of those experiences, the good and the bad, and then more recently working with people, helping them become self-directed language learners and learning to speak languages quickly, I've got to a stage now where I've got a pretty good idea of not just how I learn languages, but how other people learn as well. And more importantly, because perhaps this is something we would get onto later, but more importantly, the things that stop people learning languages, because that's on the whole journey of learning a language. It's not so much the learning method that matters. It's how to overcome all the obstacles that get in the way.
Maybe your mindset of thinking I can't and that I can't, right?
That and many other things as well, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so you talked about the students in your school and how that language barrier was creating some problems for you. Do you feel like that was the inspiration behind your mission and your passion to go down this language road, or was there something else that kind of drove you to that? No,
I think for me it was just the sheer joy that comes from being able to speak to someone else in their own language. And that's what I think always encouraged me to want to help other people. One of the most kind of impactful memories I have of language learning has been more recently when I was living in Egypt last year. I spent a year in Cairo. And Egypt's a place where people don't expect you to speak Arabic. There's not many foreigners there anyway. It gets a lot of bad press. So as a foreigner in Egypt, nothing is expected of you. You're just expected to be a kind of rich white guy, and that's the image they have of you. So I just remember very clearly a couple of occasions when I was in a kind of very kind of middle class area of Cairo in a shop or something like that. And I kind of walk into the shop and I get the usual kind of looks from people. Oh God, look, here's this Westerner coming in. But then we'd start to have a conversation, and I talk to them in Arabic, and the look on their faces when I open my mouth and I start speaking Arabic to them, the look of kind of gratitude and humility and understanding on their faces, I felt that in Egypt more than any other place that I've been to, perhaps because of the cultural difference between us and them. And the way that kind of brought us together and just created this bond, that for me is the most amazing thing about learning other languages. It's the way that you can literally bring the world together. And so that's for me why I eventually wanted to start helping people learn languages. The difficulties that you mentioned, ironically, because everybody has a lot of difficulties learning languages, obviously, because if we didn't, then everyone would be speaking loads, right? The difficulties are things that I have come to understand and appreciate more since I've started this journey, really, because, when I first started blogging and talking about language learning, I just said, oh yeah, do this and do that and do this and do that. And it's easy, right? But then people started writing in and telling me, yeah, but I've got this problem. And yeah, and I've also got this problem. So over time, my approach has actually evolved. And now I spend more time actually kind of bringing people's attention to the things that are holding them back, because I find that to be more effective than anything else in actually helping people advance and make progress.
Yeah. There's so many things that you said that I'd love to go more into. I love how, when you are learning their language and you can speak to somebody in their native tongue, it is like the ultimate respect for that person, right? And how that helps really bridge that gap, like you said, of the language barrier and understanding and maybe having more empathy for people of other cultures. Is that what you have found? I mean, that's what it sounds like. So that's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. I mean, the language is one of the ways that we express ourselves, right? There are many other ways, but language is one of the ways that express ourselves. And I think, and it's linked to traveling and cultural understanding as well. And one of the things that you learn from traveling and living abroad is that people have like preconceptions and stereotypes and prejudices. We live by them.
Yeah.
You know? We don't like to think that we do, but we really do. Everybody does. And the less educated a place is, the more those stereotypes and preconceptions are prevalent. And so I think you just, like, straight away by talking to someone in their language, you just disrupt the paradigm. And like, no longer are you this sort of stereotypical blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy from the West. Suddenly you're speaking in their language, and they have to reconsider what they were just thinking before I started talking to them, you know? And so it forces people it's like a pattern interrupt, you know? It forces people to stop, to interrupt whatever they were thinking, and to deal with you as a person and to deal with the issues in front of them, rather than just falling back and relying on stereotypes, the kind of stereotypes that are reinforced by the media and all these things.
Yeah, great. Well, let's talk about some of the challenges that you've had along the way and what you've learned from those. I mean, you talked about how sometimes those failures have helped you really grow. Tell us about some of those.
Yeah, well, I mean, isn't it cliche? Like, I learned more from the failures were a blessing and all of that. I mean, yeah, but it's absolutely true. I mean, it's absolutely true. I mean, there are so many. It's difficult to know where to start. But, you know, one of the things that...
Well, I love how, first of all, you stepped outside of the classroom and you just kind of dove right in. I mean, that also has a bunch of challenges to it, right?
Yeah, well, absolutely, because you no longer have this structure that's imposed by your teacher or by someone else. And there's so many to talk about, but I think one of the main things is the question of when do you start speaking the language that you're learning. And it's quite a contentious issue among language circles. Generally speaking, there are kind of two camps. The first camp, which say, you know, speak from day one. So if you start to learn Spanish tomorrow, then you should start speaking straight away. And there's another camp that says, no, study first, put in the time, and then when you're ready, start speaking naturally. And the problem that I have with the second one that I mentioned, which is the approach of, you know, take it easy, do some studying, do your courses, work through your textbooks, and eventually you'll want to start speaking. The thing that happens is that you never do, because a number of things happen. First of all, by avoiding speaking with native speakers early on, you start to develop this fear of interaction, because everybody's got some bad memory of trying to speak another language and being laughed at, or being, you know,
they stare
just
at
looking
you
into
like...
still looking with a blank face or something like that. Everybody's got those memories. And so the longer you wait before you start really practicing on a regular basis, the more you build up this fear factor. And I'm sure everybody that's listening who's ever tried to learn another language can relate to that. The second thing that happens is that by not speaking at the beginning, what you're effectively saying is that there is a point at which you are ready to speak. But what is that point? It's completely arbitrary. It's different from one person to the next. But there's one thing I can tell you for sure is that you will never feel like you're ready.
Yeah.
Because there's always more to learn. There are always more mistakes to iron out. There's always more expressive and articulate grammar to learn. So the reason I mention this is because when I was living in Japan, I was very lucky to spend a few years in Japan a few years back. And, you know, Japan's a very different country to the UK. And we have similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. And the language is hard. The people are not very outgoing and friendly. So it's not easy to... Well, I found myself moving there and not really making many friends and being quite isolated when I was there. And so I fell into the study trap, and I spent my first couple of years just studying nonstop. You know, buying textbook after textbook, going to classes, taking exams. And after 2 years, I still didn't speak the language. Like, I would be like actively avoiding situations where I could speak the language because I was scared. Mm-hmm. You know, I think, well, I don't know what to say here, or I haven't got the words on the tip of my tongue, or, you know, what happens if these guys laugh at me, or in some cases in Japan, I've had people actually run away before when I've spoken to them, which is kind of crazy. Anyone who's been to Japan will understand what's that about. But yeah, there's a very high barrier to social interaction in Japan in general. And so I just kind of put that off because I was scared of it. And it got to the point where after a couple of years in Japan, I said, hang on, this is ridiculous. You know, I spent the last 2.5 years studying and I still can't speak. So something has to change. And so I said to myself, right, well, what would happen if I stopped the studying, I just knocked it on the head, and just spent the future just, you know, doing nothing but speaking with people. And so I did. I went out and I found conversation partners, and then I arranged to speak somewhere between 30 to 60 minutes of Japanese every day of the week, almost, like 4 or 5 days a week. And within a few weeks, my kind of nervous, scared Japanese totally transformed. And through just the kind of experience of speaking with people and forcing myself to carry on and express myself and make myself understood, after 3 or 4 weeks of that happening, I had gone from this kind of little wreck in the corner to a confident speaker of the language. And that was a huge turning point for me, because I understood that, yes, you have to study and you have to be a student of the language that you're learning, but none of that matters unless you're actually speaking. And so speaking, for me, has to be foregrounded in the learning process, because there is too much to lose by not doing that early on.
Yeah, I'm horrible at that. Whenever I'm trying to learn a language, I don't want to try to speak it because I'm afraid I'm going to sound silly. But my husband just jumps right in, and I have seen him like progress faster because, you know, he's just willing to just jump right in. Even if he doesn't say it correctly, the person usually corrects them, and then he gets the, you know, he gets the...
Yeah, and also, like, it also doesn't matter. Like, no one really cares if you make a mistake, because language isn't a test, it's communication, right? And if you want to dive right in and you want to eat dinner, then you have to order that dinner, right? And it doesn't really matter if you make mistakes whilst you're ordering the food in the restaurant. And yeah, what you said is absolutely right, that progress begets progress. The more progress you make, the more you're motivated to keep on learning. And yeah, it's not that that's the most kind of refined, highbrow way of learning a language, but like I said, it's just, there's too much to lose by not starting to speak early on.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right. So go ahead and tell me how you feel like your paradigm has changed over time and with experience, you know, with your life's mission of doing languages.
Yeah, so I made the decision. I mean, I have a website, and I started that website in 2013, I think. So it's only been going for a couple of years. And I thought at the time that, I might be able to teach a few people a few things with my experience. I mean, I knew I had a few languages under my belt and some experience. And so I knew that there was an opportunity there and I had something to offer, but I had no vision of what that looked like. And I realize now that there's so many people out there in the world with so much to offer, but so much of the time they simply don't realize the value of what they've got. And they don't understand how to actually realize that in practice through a medium like a blog or a podcast or whatever it is. So, now I'm at the point where my entire world is devoted to helping people learn languages. And like, it's as simple as that. And I can say it with that much confidence because I understand how the whole thing works now, how you can reach so many people through mediums like this podcast. Thousands and thousands of people over the next however many years are going to listen to. I mean, it's just an incredible thing. The world has changed so much. And I feel fortunate that after the last couple of years of really hard work and growing my platform and working with people, that I'm in a position where I understand how to reach people and I'm able to do that. So yeah, it's been a gradual change, but I guess it's interesting how that change has not been about what I want to do, because I've always wanted to help people with languages, but the change has been in my understanding of how that's actually possible in the world that we live in. Yeah,
well, and you talked about earlier how we set up like these preconceived notions of us learning the language. How have you been able to kind of break those barriers down for people and have them learn a little more effectively, kind of in a psychology way, it sounded to me?
Well, again, one of the things that I've learned from doing this for a long time is the power of story. And you asked me earlier what was one of your failures, and I talked about how in Japan I was getting frustrated and I couldn't talk. And then you asked me before, how did you get started with your first language? And I told you the story of when I went to Paris. I could have just cut it down and said to you, I started learning French and I tried this and I tried that. And then in the case of the Japanese story, I could have just said, I learned that you have to start speaking because it's very important.
Yeah.
But what I've come to understand is the power of story. And then so hopefully through these kind of anecdotes that I've talked about just now, like that makes it more vivid and that make people more able to assimilate and kind of learn the lessons from them. So the way that I help people with these blocks, if you like, with these difficulties, I mean, it's changing and evolving all the time, but I'm moving more and more towards using story as the medium of conveying to people the importance of this stuff.
Yeah. With your story, it was interesting how I could feel how that felt for you in Japan, just because that's how I feel. And then all of a sudden, yeah, there was a lot of empathy there that I understood a little better. So
yeah. You know what's cool is that in the future as well, you're going to remember that.
Yeah.
Because and we remember stories. But what we don't remember just nuggets of information that we're given because we're hammered with them all day long.
Yeah. Sometimes the bullet points don't make it in there, right?
Right, exactly. And that's why, some of the biggest lessons that, when I'm making, creating and teaching stuff and I'm thinking about, what's the best way to teach this? Almost always the kind of golden nuggets that come to me and make me think, oh, I should do it in this way. It's because I remember a story that someone told me. It's not because I remember the thing that they told me itself, but I remember the story. And so, it's incredibly powerful. And now as well, I kind of get, it's so funny because when I meet people in conferences and things like that, they come up to me and they say, oh, I'm just like you. I went to Paris and I learned my first language or whatever. They kind of tell me how they remember this little anecdote that I told. I'm like, how on earth do you know that? And it's because I just talked about it off the cuff on a podcast or something like that. But they remember it and it sticks with them because stories engage with the content, but also with the emotion. And it's the best teaching medium, and very underutilized as well.
And gives them something to hang on to like that. Well, and sometimes we all come up with different, like what that means for me, what your story could mean for me versus what it could mean for somebody else could be really different. But because it was put in a story form, I took what I needed from it and the other person might take what they need from it, but you're still affecting us. So that's awesome. Yeah. Before we go on, let's listen to this message.
Hey guys, it's Mark here again, producer of the Luminous Mind podcast. Just wanted to remind you that the nominations for the podcast awards have already opened and will only be open for a couple more weeks. So why don't you head on over to theluminousmind.net and click on the Nominate tab and nominate the Luminous Mind podcast for your favorite show in the education category. And hey, since you're there, why don't you put us down for People's Choice also? Thanks for listening and have a great day.
Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Olly Richards, learning practical foreign language skills. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the services that you offer and maybe some success that you've seen with that. We could go on. You have books and podcasts and, where do you want to start with those?
Wow, yeah. I mean, I have this, I just love making stuff, Okay, well, let me go, from the beginning. I mean, 99% of everything I do is totally free, and I have, a blog at iwillteachyoualanguage.com where I write articles every week. I mean, so at the moment, what I'm doing every week is I'm working my way through a series where I'm sort of making videos about my exact language study routine every day, which people are really enjoying, I think, because they want to see, exactly what I do, not theory and ideas, but what do you do first, and then what do you do, and then what do you do next? And so I love to blog about that kind of practical stuff. And then I have a podcast as well, and the podcast is like a kind of Q&A podcast. So people send in questions, and I answer them. So they're quite short podcasts. So people send in questions like anything from I love it when people send in their stories. So they say one guy wrote in and said, "Hey, Olly, I'm living in Sweden and I'm working in a Swedish company and I speak pretty good Swedish, but I find it really difficult to make small talk with my colleagues. What should I do?" And so I kind of break down the situation and suggest to him how he could go about learning and then improving his ability to make the small talk. And I remember one woman, I think it was Melissa from the States, and she said, "Olly, I'm learning Spanish, but every time I try to practice my Spanish in the street, everybody replies to me in English. What should I do?" And so it's just a fantastic way for me to kind of connect with people and answer their questions. Yeah, I mean, the podcast is so much fun to do. And then I have a bunch of other things as well. I have a number of courses, and the courses that I produce tend to help people with one specific problem. So the course that most people who find me start with is simply where I break down exactly how to study every day. And it's based on all the lessons that I've learned. So Whereas most people will kind of go off, if they want to learn, say, French, they'll go off and they'll buy a Rosetta Stone French or a Michel Thomas French or something like that. And these courses, I mean, they can be great. They can be not so great too. But one of the things about these courses is that language courses tend to provide you a lot of information. They teach you how to conjugate a verb and the difference between masculine and feminine nouns and things like that. And you need that stuff. But like we were talking about earlier, you know, one of the things that I've learned from my experience of all this language learning is that it's very rarely the specific difficulties of a language that cause you huge problems, right? Everything is learnable. The thing that will stop you learning is if you can't find the time to study, if you can't stay motivated, if you can't find the right textbook to use, if you can't find someone to speak with, if you struggle to understand native speakers when they talk to you, if you can't make yourself understood in a conversation, if you don't know how to learn and memorize vocabulary without forgetting it. These are the things that will prevent you from learning the language. And so in my language learning foundations course, what I do is I just show you exactly what to do every day so that you can take the stuff that you learn from the textbook, but then actually learn it and consolidate it and be able to turn it into a successful result so you can actually speak and use the language. So yeah, I mean, I have a number of other courses as well, but I think that's the one that kind of best represents my learning and my philosophy, because it's kind of transferring everything I've learned to people who maybe haven't had that experience of learning lots of languages themselves.
Well, so what I'm getting from this, and try to correct me if I'm wrong, but so how you feel like your language program is maybe different than some of the others is that instead of just giving out, you know, vocabulary words or how to conjugate verbs, you actually help them be able to implement that into like their daily life of being able to use that language. Is that correct?
That's exactly it. Because like
Awesome.
if you want to learn to conjugate a verb in Spanish, you can pick up any textbook off the shelf and get that information in seconds, right?
Yeah.
But what's going to happen is, and again, anybody who's listening who has learned a language before can tell me if we'll see if there are any nodding heads about here if they relate to this. What's going to stop you from taking what you've just learned about conjugating those verbs any further is that the next day or the next few days, you can't find the time to study. Or when you come to a conversation, you forget what you've learned.
Yeah.
Or you move on to the next chapter in the book and you confuse them. Like, it's not the language itself, it's the kind of meta stuff around it. And so what you need in order to actually take the stuff that you learn and make it successful is a sensible strategy for planning out your learning and doing it in a way that actually results in you being able to speak, not just hold the knowledge in your head like a maths equation.
Yeah, I think that's my problem is it just stays in there. I don't ever try to speak it out. So do people like study in front of the mirror? I mean, what are some testimonials that you have heard about the way that you help them integrate their language into, you know, their life?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, one of my favorite stories is from a great guy called Robert who lives in New Zealand. And he sent me a photo recently on Facebook, and like I wanted to print it out and frame it on my wall because it was so cool. And Robert's learning Spanish, and he's one of these people who had been studying for a long time, and he'd just done what he was taught to do in school. So he'd kind of been working through his books, and he'd been doing his exercises, and kind of thinking, all right, I'm doing the right thing. When's it going to work? You know, it's about time now. Enough years have passed. And so Robert went through one of my courses, and what he wanted to do, his aim was to use Spanish with a refugee community in New Zealand, who are a Spanish-speaking refugee community. And one of the problems was that he had been, during all of his study, he'd been working through these Spanish textbooks, right, which are just very generic, step-by-step textbooks. One of the things that I get people to do is to actually consider their situation and exactly what they want to use the language for.
Like the application makes a big difference. Right?
Exactly. And so in Robert's situation, you know, what he needed his Spanish for was to talk to those refugees in New Zealand about very specific things to do with their situation. He didn't need to explain to them how to order steak in a restaurant or ask when the next train to Madrid leaves, like the stuff that you learn in a textbook, right?
Yeah.
He needed to help them with very specific things. And so going through my program, what he did was he got very, very clear about his aims and what he wanted to be able to talk to these refugees about, the topics of conversation. So he kind of had this very clear idea of what he wanted to actually use the language for. Because once you know that, you can very easily go out and break it down and find the stuff that you need to learn. So, for example, if you want to be able to talk to people, I think in Robert's case, he wanted to be able to talk to people about the religious community there, I think. And he needed to be able to talk to the refugees about the local church or something like that. And so one of the things that I had him do was actually go in and record people talking about I'm not sure whether it was actually in a church service or a discussion about the church. And I had him record people talking about that and then take that back, transcribe it and analyze it. And he focused a few weeks of his study on that. So rather than learning about tourist Spanish from his textbook, he learned to actually talk about the specific topics to do with the church that he wanted to. And so straight away, and you can see how quickly he would have seen the results there in his ability to actually talk to the people, the refugees there on the ground. And so, he told me that, and that was fantastic. But what was even better was a couple of weeks after that, he sent me a photo, and he'd received a certificate of appreciation from the New Zealand Red Cross, and specifically cited the fact that he was able to use his Spanish to make the refugees there feel welcome and to help them out in their daily lives. And how cool is that? What better, what more fulfilling and gratifying is something like that? Be able to learn the language, go and use it to help people, and then receive a certificate of appreciation from it. So I was so proud of Robert from that.
Yeah, that is a really good idea, because that's, like you said, you have all this knowledge in your head, but when it comes to actually using it, it's really difficult. But yeah, if you can pinpoint an area, it would make it much easier to figure out what questions to ask. Awesome. That's great. So tell me about mentoring. What mentors have you had along the way that made a significant difference in your life and your success? And then what have you learned from, and we've kind of talked about that, but learned from mentoring other people as well?
Yeah, fantastic question. I've never really until recently, I've never really sought out specific mentors. They've kind of just come my way, and I often haven't realized that they are kind of a mentor until later on. I've had mentors for so many different things. Back when I was studying music in college, I'd have mentors there who were kind of different from my teachers. In the various different jobs and businesses that I've been involved in the past, I've always genuinely got into them because I've had a mentor of some kind who has actually inspired me to get involved in that stuff in the first place. With languages, for a very, very long time, I just figured things out for myself, and I didn't have any mentors. Things very quickly started to change for me when I started my website, and I started to know about this huge community of language learners online. I never knew that existed, but I just discovered it a couple of years ago, and since then I've been very fortunate to meet some of the most talented language professionals or language learners or polyglots, linguists, whatever you want to call them, in the world. People like Richard Simcott, Alex Rawlings, who've since become good friends of mine. And I always go out of my way to surround myself with those people. And whether they are, in the capacity of friends or acquaintance or business partner or whatever it is, I think that there's so many people who can serve as a mentor in that capacity. And in the case of Richard and Alex, for example, they just hanging out with them and listening to them talking about how they learn and what they do when they go about learning languages. I've considerably upped my game in the last couple of years just from being exposed to that. And then in business as well, I'm committed to helping as many people can successfully learn to speak a new language. And part of that involves growing my business to a scale where I can reach people. And so in the last couple of years, I invested a lot of time and money in access to people who are essentially mentors to help me grow my business as well. Yeah, it's a theme that's been throughout my entire life, really, since I started doing things on my own and wanting to create stuff.
Yeah. Well, and there is a big difference between a mentor and a teacher, right? You talked about having more of a friendship or more of a intimate type relationship versus just being taught, information being spilled. So that's great.
And I think that analogy works as well within the language learning thing, because a teacher, we've all had language teachers, right? We know what teachers do, but it's the mentor who really makes the difference. It's the mentor who says, like when you turn up and say, oh, I haven't studied for the last week because I just can't be bothered. I'm just too stressed out at work or whatever. And the mentor says, look, I understand. I know what you're going through, but like, what's the one thing that you could do every day to make progress in your language? Such that it fits around your schedule and so that you can keep going without putting too much stress on yourself. And you kind of talk that question through, and you end up at a point where you do start to do stuff every day, and that mentor kind of guides you through. The teacher doesn't do that stuff typically. I mean, a great teacher will, but teachers typically don't see that as being their role. And so, the mentor is, it's so important. It's hugely important.
Yeah, personalize it quite a bit. So tell me what books that you feel like have been the most influential. We talked about just getting out there and learning it, but is there any books that you would read that might help people?
Do you mean like particularly in terms of languages, or just in general?
In general, because I mean, you talked about kind of the psychology behind it. Maybe there's some books like that of increasing your confidence or something like that is fine too.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's one book that's had more of an impact on me than anything else in recent years, and that's The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And this book became very, very popular last year. I mean, it still is, but it kind of exploded last year, and a lot of people were talking about it. The One Thing is it's essentially the main message behind this book is that we're all familiar with the 80-20 principle, right? That 20% of what we do gets us 80% of the results. Well, what they do is they take this a little bit further and boil it down to many cases where, in fact, the way that people achieve success in whatever they're doing, whether it's business or language or relationships or whatever it may be, the quickest way to extraordinary results is by focusing on one thing. The book itself is incredibly well written because a concept like this sounds very simple, right? The way that I've just described it, but it's one of those things that there is a way to go from hearing about a concept like this to then actually applying it and getting results in your life. And the great thing about the book is they really walk you through so many examples and get you to think about how you can apply the concept in practice. And since I started implementing their lessons in my life, everything's changed by several orders of magnitude. And so I would, for anybody who's creative, who wants to produce results in any area of their life, that's the only book that I say don't read anything else until you read this book, because it's so powerful.
That's awesome. Well, and I feel like we have talked a lot about how important application is in learning and growing and finding your mission, all those things. So I think that fits along very well. Great. So tell me, we talked about kind of some habits that you have to have, daily habits maybe in your personal life that you feel have been pretty helpful. What are some of those?
Yeah, I mean, so I've struggled with years with habits because I'm not a particularly disciplined person. I always try to boil everything down to one thing. I mean, so you can see the link here, right, between the different parts of of everything I do, really. And one of the interesting things that happens when you run your own business is that it can start to consume everything that you do. And there have been a number of knock-on effects of that for me since I've started my business. And one of those things is that it's been increasingly difficult to find time for things like language learning and exercise. And really, since I read The One Thing, trying to simplify everything down to the kind of purest form, and to really try and identify the minimum you can do to get the most powerful results. And so, to give you an example, for me with my language learning, I've known for a while that as soon as the day begins and I'm out and about and doing things, like, I will not study for the rest of the day. I won't do it because I'm too easily distracted. There are too many things going on. And so what I've started doing now is that I do all my language study first thing in the morning when I wake up, before anybody else is up, before my phone starts ringing. And so I do that right at the beginning with 45 minutes of quiet, focused time, because I know that if that's all I do in the day, then it's been a success. And that's been huge because it's enabled me to make that regular daily progress. And now I've added to that. So after I finish that, then I go to the gym. But the language learning and the gym, these are two things that if I don't do them, my life falls apart. I've learned that. You have to exercise and you have to do that thing which makes you feel fulfilled, right? So I now do those two things first thing in the day before I do anything else. And it's harder than you think, because I wake up and I want to start checking email and start working and stuff. I'm trying to force myself to do those things. And it's like, it's not huge amounts of time. It's half an hour, 45 minutes on languages and about the same in the gym. But, after that, when I start the day, I feel amazing and the results show through further down the line.
Yeah. Well, and I heard somebody say recently that if you check your email and your Facebook the first thing in the morning, you can count that your day is going to be 30% less productive than it would if you put those first things first like that. So.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. It's scary stuff.
Yeah. Great. So tell me maybe what some of your long-term goals are, and then the legacy that you hope to leave. We'll kind of put those in together.
Yeah, well, my longer-term goals really is just to just grow and grow and grow and reach as many people as I can, because I am extremely dissatisfied, shall we say, in the way that languages are taught in general around the world. It's kind of a commoditized industry which does not produce results. And I would like to keep going until I haven't really made this a kind of firm thing. I probably should, but I would like to be able to say that I've helped 1 million people learn a language. And I don't know exactly what form that would take, but at what point you can say that I've actually helped them. But I don't see any reason not to work on that scale, because it's possible now. We live in an era where that's possible. So that's my long-term goal, is to keep going, find ways of reaching more people in a more effective way. And I guess, that ties directly into the legacy, I guess. I still feel like I'm just getting started. So to think of a legacy is kind of, it's kind of a curious thing to do. But, if I can have made an impact in some way in the way that people around the world are learning languages and the effectiveness with which they're doing it, then that will have been a great thing to have done.
Yep. Well, and we live our legacy every day. Eventually, what we are doing today will be remembered for way down the road. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Great. So before we say goodbye, give us some final parting words of advice for our listeners, and then give us your contact information of how we can get in touch with you.
Absolutely, yeah. So my advice really comes back to I'm gonna be slightly repetitive, and I'm gonna say, look, I'm sure there are things that you want to achieve in your life, and we have to start off from a place where we understand and appreciate that those things are possible. I've surprised time and time again with achieving things as soon as I set my mind to it. And so I would say, get clear on what you want, be honest with yourself to what you want, and then start by identifying the one thing you need to do over the coming weeks and months to start to make that a reality. Don't make it 2 things, don't make it 3 things, make it one thing. And then move heaven and earth to guard that one thing and set time aside to do it every single day, and you will get results that you didn't think possible. That's I guess I can't really guarantee it, can I? But that's as close as you can get to guaranteed results. Is just getting clear on what you want, just establishing the one thing that's going to help you get there, whether that's learning a language or improving your relationship or starting a business, whatever it may be. There is one thing that will get you there the fastest. And then guard that time and go for it. And if people would like to get in touch with me, well, the best place is probably to head over to the website, which is iwillteachyoualanguage.com. I'd also love it if you came over and joined me on the podcast, which is by the same name. It's the I Will Teach You a Language podcast that you can search out on iTunes or whatever podcasting app you use. And I'd love to hear from you. So, I'm quite an approachable guy. So if you'd like to get in touch and send me a question or ask me anything, go ahead. And I reply to every email. So I'm always happy to hear from people.
Great. Well, and I will be sure to link his website and everything up on our show notes for you. So great. Thank you so much, Olly, for helping us light our minds on fire. We really wish you the best.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a great chat and fantastic questions as well. I really appreciate that.
Great.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Olly Richards, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list, and get our new monthly newsletter. Then check out our services tab to see how we can continue to assist you, our fire starters. Also, to help us continue production of inspiring content, go to the sponsor tab at theluminousmind.net for more information on sponsorship and affiliate programs. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, and now Instagram. Get our free audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider these easy ways. Tell your friends about us, leave us a review, share our content, tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.